Hi, and welcome to this week's installment of our reflections on the biblical story we'll be hearing in worship next Sunday and Wednesday. We are in week 2 of a 4-week series on the Ten Commandments, and our scripture readings are Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 through 11, and Matthew chapter 22, verses 33 through 40. So I hope you've had a chance to at least look at those or maybe even have them open with you right now. So between the Jewish religion and different Christian denominations, there's actually 3 numbering systems for the 10 Commandments. And so just to keep this a little simple, if we consider Matthew's summary of the greatest commandments, to love God with all our heart, all our soul, and all our mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. The commandments we're covering today in Exodus are the love God commandments. These are the how-tos for being in a loving relationship with God. They're also known as the first tablet commandments. And so I'm hoping to have some images and a couple pictures to go along with this in the blog or in the comments on the Facebook page. I hope you find those helpful. So, how to be in a loving relationship with God? Well, first, have no other God before you and no graven images or idols. So what is this about? This is about who God is in our lives. It's about relationship. That God is our creator and we are God's children. And also because of God giving these commandments to the Israelites at the time, it is about God's identity to them as the one who brought them out of slavery, out of the house of Egypt. And so this is about our relationship with the one who frees us from those things in this world that hold us captive. And it means that the first person we go to for all good things in our lives, the first person we go to when times are tough, when we're struggling, when we need something, is God. But another way to look at this, is also a matter of trust. Who do we trust most? There's lots of people we trust in our lives, close family and friends. Maybe there's even some institutions that we trust. But God is the only one that is truly and always trustworthy. Trust in anything earthly and any person can fail. And too often, the person we put the most trust in is ourselves. Our own ability to make money, to have property, to attain financial security. And it's God, though. God is even more trustworthy than ourselves. And so this is the first and primary commandment. Have no other gods before you. Trust no one before you trust God. The second commandment here, or the second point I want to talk about, is you shall not make a wrongful use of the name of God. Now, so often we think about, well, don't use God's name when you're swearing or when you're cursing or when you drop that rock on your toe, right? But this commandment too also has to do with identity and relationship. Name in the Old Testament has to do with who the person being named is. It's about their identity. It's about reputation. So not misusing God's name is not to mischaracterize who God is and who God's identity is. Again, this is the God who brought the Israelites out of Egypt. This is the one who frees. And so we're not supposed to mess up God's reputation, if you will. We're supposed to keep that clean. And finally, the last one I want to talk about is keeping the Sabbath. That is something that I think we have a really hard time with in this culture. We live in a 24/7 world. But the primary reason that God says to keep a Sabbath is because God kept it. our behavior ultimately should be modeled on God's behavior. And it's for all creation to have a Sabbath, even the animals. And so this is actually part of God's creative process, that in creating us, in our creating whatever it is we create, that rest is part of that process. And so we're supposed to follow God's lead in that. But there's something even more intriguing in this commandment. This commandment also starts to get into the love your neighbor part, because the two, loving God and love your neighbor, cannot be separated. This is a justice commandment, because not only are we supposed to rest, we are to make sure our servants and our slaves and our animals rest. So this is a commandment of equity and of equality. And so in turn, this commandment and how we love God by keeping the Sabbath for the Lord also becomes a commandment to help us love our neighbor. So I hope that those ideas and thoughts are helpful to you as you read through this section and start to think about the commandments and what they really are for us and how we use them. And I would love to hear your feedback, your comments, your questions. Have a blessed day. Thanks.